Hi, and welcome to my sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for May 2022. I've got a bunch of stories to get through, so I'm going to start off right away, and if you want the text version of this roundup, it's available on my book and review blog, which is Maria's Read. So, I'm going to start right away, and this month, my two first picks are from an anthology, and it's the anthology When Things Get Dark, which is a fantastic horror anthology edited by Ellen Datlow, with stories inspired by and written in tribute to the works of Shirley Jackson. It's full of dark, weird, disturbing, and unsettling stories. Like the blurb for the anthology says, it's a collection of new and exclusive short stories inspired by and in tribute to Shirley Jackson. And it includes works by Joyce Carol Oates, Josh Malerman, Maria Machado, Paul Tremblay, Stephen Graham Jones, Elizabeth Hand, Kelly Link, Cassandra Kaw, Laird Barron, Jeffrey Ford, M. Rickert, Shauna Maguire, Gemma Files, and many more. Anyway, I highly recommend this anthology, and two of my stories this month are from it, When Things Get Dark. The first one is Skinder's Veil by Kelly Link from When Things Get Dark. Now, Link's story is so good that it made me... I had to go have a lie down after I read it, both because it's so good and because of just like this vivid strangeness of it all. I just love this story to bits. Okay, also, sorry if you can hear birds in the background. I guess my birds are having a bit of a tantrum in the other room right now. Anyway, so Skinder's Veil is a haunted house story, but not really. It's maybe more like a haunted life story. Anyway, it is an absolute knockout. A man goes to a secluded house out in the sticks to help out a friend who has been house sitting there for a long time. And there are several very strict rules about what to do and what not to do, who to let in and who to not let in while you're staying at the house. And while he's there, several very strange visitors come calling, telling very strange tales. Anyway, just get this anthology, read the stories. They're absolutely wonderful. My second pick from the anthology is Tiptoe by Laird Barron. It's also from When Things Get Dark. And this is just a masterfully crafted slow burn of a horror story where I kept having the feeling that there were things twisting and distorting just out of view as I was reading it. A man is recounting his childhood and his memories of his family, in particular his father. And as he tells us, there was nothing wrong with his childhood. Nothing really bad happened. Or did it? Spoilers, something was really, really wrong. And I love the way childhood memories are dealt with in the story. There are the memories we actively remember and talk about with others because they are the official version of our childhood, so to speak. And there are the actual raw memories of things we might forget or almost forget because they don't fit easily into polite conversation. Anyway, both these stories are fantastic. The anthology is great. When Things Get Dark, edited by Ellen Datlow. Check it out. My next story pick is Drowned Best Friend by Dominique Dickey in Fantasy Magazine. This story is about Joseph. Joseph, who is haunted, or maybe visited is a better word, by his dead best friend Les. Les died on the lake when they were both 12 and appears when there's water around, mostly at Joseph's house, and Les is always still dripping wet, just like when she drowned. And since Les died, things have been difficult for Joseph, not only because of Les's death, but because Joseph has come out as trans to his mom and everyone at school, and he's trying his best to navigate through that. This story does so many things so very well all at once. It captures the mortifying awkwardness and overconfidence of being a teen, and it delves deep into grief and guilt and the terrible struggle to try not just to become and be who you really are, but to find out what and who that is, which is part of adolescence. And I love the gentle way the story deals with what it's like to be a 12-year-old ghost, stuck forever being 12 and dead. And it's just both a tender and sharp story, this one. My next story pick is also from Fantasy Magazine. It's One Day the Cave Will Be Empty by K.J. Chien. And I love stories that put a different spin on motherhood and parenthood, exploring the darker sides of being a parent, and this story does that brilliantly. Li Xing is the mother in the story, and she thinks that she gave birth to a monster. Maybe she did, though her husband doesn't seem to see it exactly the same way. The parents have hidden their daughter away in a nearby cave since she was born, but it's been 19 years and now things are changing in the cave and in their village. I love everything about the story, but especially how it explores Li Xing's feelings of failure and guilt and shame. And I also love how Qian twists all those feelings and Li Xing's expectations in an unexpected direction. My next story pick is Too Little, Too Much by John Wiswell and Cosmas Infinities. Wiswell's story is marvelous and devastating, quietly aching, and viscerally raw. In it, there are two brothers, Lark and Brantley, who live with their father. Each brother has a thing they do. Lark's thing is the fire that snaps into existence from his body when he's upset. And Brantley's thing is hurting Lark. It's not a good combination, and is made worse by the abuse perpetrated by their father. That abuse is mostly alluded to and mostly takes place out of sight in the story, but it's harrowing all the same. Wiswell has such a tender touch with the brothers here, laying bare the hurt and the pain in their relationship and finding a difficult way for them to maybe survive together. My next story pick is A Monster in the Shape of a Boy by Hannah Yang in Apex Magazine. This is a perfectly constructed, intricately tied knot of a horror tale about monsters and about a boy becoming a monster hunter. Peng is learning this trade of monster hunting from his father, but the monsters he meets take on shapes and forms that make it very hard to kill them. And I'll just say this story bites hard at the end. My next story pick is Hoodie by Tanya Libbard, also in Apex Magazine. In Libbard's story, we follow Rose, who grows up in a Trinidad orphanage, not knowing who her parents are. She sings in the streets to make money, and one day, on a lonely dirt road, she encounters a Moko Jumbi. Rose expects this encounter to be the end of her, and she kind of welcomes that, but that is not what happens. Libbard's writing pulls you in from the first line and goes deep into Rose's fear and pain without reducing her to someone helpless. Rose has been dealt a bad hand in life, but she finds a way to survive and maybe even shed the pain she struggled with her whole life. This is a powerful, visceral story that packs a real emotional punch. My next story pick is In the Water by Rowan Wren in Nightmare. And this is a beautiful, lyrical story about a dead girl, which sounds strange, but about a dead girl floating in the river, being changed by death and water into something else, something new. I love how this story doesn't focus on the murder or the murderers, but completely on the girl herself. Commenting on the story, Wren says, "As a fan of true crime, I've thought a lot about how death is consumed, the dead often reduced to props in their own story. I wrote In the Water to explore that same loss from the perspective of the victim. returning some autonomy while maintaining the truth of death's passive nature. And oh, that is absolutely 100% in my wheelhouse. I love it. What a great story. My next story pick is The Destination Star by Gregory Marlowe in Strange Horizons. I love generation ship stories, and here Marlowe tells a powerful, deeply emotional story about a generation ship by zooming in very close on a small scene and just a few characters, specifically Ben. Ben has to change a light bulb in a room in the spaceship that has been his home since he was born, the ship he will die on, the ship that has already been traveling towards its destination for several generations. And through this small scene focused on Ben and his work partner, we get to see and especially feel the magnitude of the journey and the toll it's taken on the passengers. But this is not a story about despair. There is hope here, even though it is suffused with longing, sadness, and hardship. My next story pick is She Dreams in Digital by Katie Grace Carpenter and Diabolical Plots. This is another generation ship story. This generation ship is traveling through space. And the ship was originally carrying humans that were supposed to find a new place to live beyond Earth, but the journey does not go as planned. And now the only thing alive on the ship are the plants in the garden. And those plants are changing in unforeseen ways, changing the ship too. The story really puts an unexpected twist on the whole generation ship idea, and I love how it reimagines the whole mission and journey, ending up with a very different result than was originally planned. My next story pick is Sleep Tight by Mark Jocelyn in Cast of Wonders. It's narrated by Catherine Inskip. This is a wonderfully dark, menacing, short flash fiction story that takes the monster under the bed trope and spins it into something else. There's a terrific sense of menace here that digs into real life, into the real pain and difficulty of growing up, and it packs a lot of emotional truth into very few words. My next story pick is Nobody Ever Goes Home to Zenzou by Grace Chan in Lightspeed. Now, in the story, Zenzou is not a world anyone, it's a world, a planet. It's not a world anyone would likely want to visit. The acid rain is so bad it corrodes the buildings, and it's dangerous to human beings, and yet Oren is compelled to go there because they're looking for Calum. And almost immediately we realize that both Calum and Oren have become entangled in a world in a dangerous underworld with a whole lot of shenanigans going on, and that their lives are most certainly in danger. This is a hugely entertaining science fiction story, and it's one hell of a ride. It's action-packed, it's almost cinematic in its storytelling, and at the same time it managed to do some excellent world building and give us a great set of characters while never losing its momentum. My next story pick is I Will Sing Your White Bones Home by Kat Hellison in Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And oh my goodness, if you're looking for a mer people story that will break your heart and make you want a whole novel, then this is the story for you. Hellison tells the story of a dead brother, the sister who cannot forget the last time she saw him, and their mother, who is a fearsome and perilous creature in every way. And all these characters are mere people. I love the details stitched so beautifully into the story about language and magic, death and afterlife, family and war. The world and the characters come to life vividly. And there's a terse edge to the prose that is just perfect. My next story pick is Tell Me Half a Story by Jennifer Lee Rossman in Abyss and Apex. I'll quote one line from the story. Of all the survival skills we learned from post-apocalyptic TV shows, this was the most important. No one could die unless their character arc was at a satisfying conclusion. End quote. I love how this story plays around with tropes and expectations of how things work in TV shows and movies, and how these tropes might work if you actually try to apply them to real life, post-apocalyptic life, no less. The two sisters in the story, living through a world gone terribly awry, are trying to keep themselves alive by using those tropes to their advantage. And Rossman's story explores both the sisters' determination, pain, and grief, and it's beautifully done. My next story pick is Plastic Bag Girl by Chu Yifeng in Anathema magazine. It's a brand new issue of Anathema. It just came out at the end of April for subscribers. In the story, a girl uses her innate magic to turn plastic trash from the beach into living creatures, entertaining tourists in order to make a living. And I'll quote the story here. A peacock with bottle caps for eyes and straws and spoons woven into tail feathers danced among the sands to sparkling delight. Once she'd perfected her transfigurations, it could even spread its wings and take to the air, if only for the few transient hours that her magic persisted. This is a gorgeous, sharp story that has the feeling of fairy tale woven together with near-future sci-fi, and I love its transformative ending. My next story pick is Colors of the Immortal Palette by Carolyn M. Joachim in Uncanny Magazine. Mariko in the story is a model and muse for painters, but she hungers for something else and something more. And an encounter with one of the artists she poses for goes far beyond painting and changes her life. This story came out last year, and I somehow missed out on reading it until recently. It's been nominated for several awards, and I absolutely understand why. The prose is exquisite, and Joachim weaves a complex and nuanced tale about art and history, identity and longing, life and love, and it lingers in the mind long after reading. My next story pick is Instructions to the New Waystation Warden, to be read upon my death by Shelley Jones in Rune Bear. Now, fair disclosure, I first read this story because Shelley Jones tagged me on Twitter to say that she had used some of the advice from my flash fiction tips column at the SFWA blog, but it was just tips for writing flash fiction, and that she had used some of those tips when writing the story. Specifically, my tip about using your title wisely. And it's always a treat to hear that something you did or said was helpful. So yeah, of course I had to check out the story. And it's a wonderful, cleverly crafted, and an unsettling flash piece about how to interact with a very perilous people. This story also introduced me to Rune Bear, a publication that focuses on small, promising bits of prose and poetry with elements of the strange, surreal, supernatural, and speculative. My next story pick is The Heroine Kokofe by Ife J. Ibitayo at Escape Pod, and it's narrated by Mofiyin Fuluwa Okupe. This is a science fiction story about a young woman who must go on a quest as a rite of passage, and one of the things I love about this piece is how effortlessly it blends what is clearly science fiction with a story that has the vibe and feel of a fairy tale adventure. Kokofe's people live on a planet far from Earth, but they have brought the Orisha gods with them into space, and they interact with these gods at least partly through an AI program that is still active on their old spaceship. Kokofe brings along an unexpected companion on her quest, and she must use everything she knows and everything she is in order to succeed. My next story pick is Peach Child Woman Stone by David McKim in Flash Fiction Online. This is a gorgeous, evocative, and deeply strange story about a peach pit, a family, and a child. It's also about life and childhood, adolescence, and a lot more. McKim stitches real magic into the fabric of reality in the story, and the results are breathtaking. My next story pick is The Many Murders of the South by H. Pueo in the Dark. This is a devastating short story. It's profoundly disturbing, it's full of pain and dread, and it's also brilliant. Heed the content warnings at the start of the story because it is strong stuff. Not because of gore, but because terrible things happen to a child. Now, the horrors that Pueo weave into the story are only too real, but the story plays out like a nightmare where you cannot wake up and you cannot escape. My next story pick is Malda Caribou by Becca de la Rosa in the Dark, also in the dark. This is a luscious, deliciously dark horror story where the food is described in almost intoxicating detail. The story's narrator is hired to cook for Dorothy, a rich woman who is jolted out of her food boredom by the feasts prepared for her. I love how this story hides its razor-sharp edge in the gorgeous descriptions of food, and I love how the truth of what is actually happening is slowly revealed. My next story pick is When You Stop Seeing Ghosts by Sam Rebelain in Bourbon Pen number 24. Now, in Molly's family, the story is about Molly, everyone sees ghosts everywhere until sometime around puberty when they just stop seeing them altogether. No one explains how or why this happens to Molly, and she quietly dreads the day the ghosts go away because she thinks the ghosts are trying to tell her something, maybe warn her about something. And in the end, well, she finds out the hard way what happens when you stop seeing ghosts. Is there something worse than seeing ghosts everywhere? Turns out the answer is probably yes. There's a dark sense of humor and a strangling sense of dread in the story. My next story pick is Component Parts of a Belated Apology by Anna Maria Curtis in Fireside Fiction. Now, in the story, something unforgivable happened to the narrator's mother when she was a child. Now the narrator is traveling and visiting family, finding out what happened back then and who was responsible for the fate that befell her mother. I love how this story finds a visceral, rather brutal way of visualizing the parts of the belated apology. It's made very clear that nothing can be said or done to fix the past, and that maybe beyond the apology, some retribution is needed. My next story pick is Arbitrium by Anjali Sakdeva in Tor.com. The premise of this science fiction story is absolutely fascinating. As is explained in the story's intro blurb, the main character, Vashti, is a pathogenic diplomat, meaning she's an ambassador to the world of viruses whom she communicates with through a machine that can translate their chemical signals into images, tastes, smells, sounds, and memories. In the story, Vashti is negotiating with a virus which has just begun spreading a deadly mutation in Florida. At the same time, Vashti is thinking and worrying about her daughter, who she rarely sees because she's part of a tech-averse commune. Now, I love how this story imagines a way for a human to communicate with a virus. And I also love how the process has changed Vashti's life and might also have changed the world of viruses in unexpected ways. My final story pick for this month's roundup is Do Me Out by Justine Kurtzen Norton in Utopia Science Fiction magazine. This story is set in a future where the sun is heating up and expanding, which, combined with the ongoing global warming and corporations ravaging the planet for the last bits of resources before the inevitable apocalypse, is speeding up and worsening the destruction. Daniil and Ziv are heading out together for one last trip, one last adventure, one last meal before they go out with a bang. I love how Daniil and Ziv's love story is woven into the tragedy of the oncoming apocalypse. It makes for an emotionally charged story that finds bits of love and joy even at the end of the world. And that's all my story picks for this month. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll be back next month with another roundup.